So today the assisted dying bill has actually passed its second reading in the House of Commons, and I am quite concerned about this. I do not think there are the appropriate safeguards in place. I do not think that this is the right time to be bringing in an assisted dying bill when you've got an NHS in a terrible state, leaves it completely open to abuse of the power to use assisted dying in order to save money and cut waiting lists. And I think that this graphic sums it up pretty well. You've got a hand that says the state on it there, dropping into this ocean assisted suicide, the disabled, mentally ill, vulnerable and coerced, telling them it's for the best. So the bill passed 330 to 275, so it was quite close. There were a heck of a lot of people against this bill. Now, we had Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak vote in favour of passing the legislation, but we also had Nigel Farage and Kemi Badenoch voting against the bill. Now, one important thing to note, which we will get into further in the video, is that this is the second reading. This does not mean that this has passed and this is coming into law. It's got to go off to committee stages. You'll have reports done on it. It will come back for a third reading. You've got House of Lords as well. So this is very much is not the end of the bill. And of those 330 people that voted in favour of it, these potentially will be people who are voting for it now because they want to see in the later stages what amendments are made, i.e. what safeguards are put in place to make sure that this bill is not abused. But then they might vote against it in its final stage at the third reading if they do not think the appropriate safeguards have been put in place. So that doesn't mean that 330 MPs are completely in favour of this. They may turn against it on the final reading. We'll see what amendments are made to the bill. But let's just have a look at some of the outcry against this bill that's happened today. So as you see there from this GB News article, Nigel Farage voted against it. He said on X today, "I voted against the assisted dying bill, not out of a lack of compassion, but because I fear the law will widen in scope. If that happens, the right to die may become the obligation to die." So this is the concern, the slippery slope, right? And when you're concerned about the slippery slope, is it going to happen? Because, you know, the slippery slope argument, it applies to a lot of things, to be honest. It's used constantly and you're never really sure when it's actually going to come to fruition or not. So the best way to tell is to have a look at other countries. And I thought that this tweet from Ava, I daren't try to pronounce her surname, but you probably know her, the Dutch commentator, talks about the death of the farming industry a lot. She's been standing up for our farmers recently. But on the assisted dying bill, she's Dutch and she has something to say about what happened in the Netherlands. Did they go down the slippery slope there? She says, now that the UK Parliament voted in favour of state-assisted dying, Britain is officially part of the anti-human death cult that the Netherlands legally started over 2 decades ago. Okay, strong start on this one. Let me walk you through the horrors of this practice. In the Netherlands, euthanasia and assisted suicide have been legal for over 20 years. Shockingly, it's even legal for minors from the age of 12 who suffer from unbearable suffering with no prospect of improvement, which includes psychological suffering. See, that concerns me, the psychological suffering. You're depressed, we've given you some pills, we've given you a bit of therapy, you haven't improved, so off you pop. That's my concern. I'm very concerned about that, because people can be mentally ill for a very long time, but then come around, have that epiphany moment and change it all. I think that that's quite scary. And as young as 12, that to me sounds like they have gone down the slippery slope in the Netherlands. She says that in 2021, 115 people in the Netherlands received euthanasia because of psychological suffering. 14 of them were under the age of 30. Under the age of 30. See, that I don't think that's right. 40% of all euthanasia cases happen without the patient's consent because the patient is no longer competent to give it. 40%, that's quite a large number. And when that many cases are ones where the other people around you are the ones making the decision on not you, that to me leaves it completely open to abuse. So families where the kid thinks, oh, I really want my inheritance money, I fancy buying myself a new house, I don't fancy having to take care of my old mum now and having to change her nappies and she's demented and whatnot. Oh, I'd rather have the cash. They'll tell the doctor, oh, send her off. it's open to abuse. It is open to abuse. You have to have very strict safeguards in place, and the problem is if you have safeguards, those might even be torn down over the years as we go down the slippery slope. She says the fact that this is legal deeply reveals who our leaders are and what they want. First of all, they negate the reality of God, hope and miracles, and rob people of a second chance. A government that negates the sanctity of life, that is a government that at minimum doesn't care about you, and in worst case wants you dead. So very strong words there, a bit of a religious message, but I think that the point she makes about robbing people of a second chance, I think regardless of whether you are religious or not, is very important, because there are many cases, and we'll get to a couple of cases where we look at MPs speaking of people who have been told you've only got a few months to live, and then they end up turning it all around and they don't end up dying. But if we had assisted dying, they may have sadly lost their lives unnecessarily. So there are lots and lots of concerns about this. Also, Winston Marshall tweeted, state-sponsored suicide, euphemistically called assisted dying, has passed in Parliament. This is a dark day for Britain. So he's not happy about this either. Just going back to reform. So Nigel Farage voted against this. But Lee Anderson MP, he put out a video this morning before he went into the debate saying that looking at most of the emails that he was receiving in his inbox from constituents, most of his constituents emailing in were actually in favour of the assisted dying bill. So I thought that that is very, very interesting. So maybe there, although Nigel Farage is voting against this bill, amongst reform supporters there may be much more of a divided opinion. Let me know in the comments what you think of this bill. Am I worrying a bit too much? As I said, I'm not completely against assisted dying. I just think that it's very much open to abuse at this time, when the NHS is in a very, very dire state. They do not have palliative care right. They're desperate to save money. They're desperate to cut down waiting lists. I think that it really isn't the right time to this. Now, we've had a look at what some of the people on the right had to say about this, but interestingly, there are a heck of a lot of MPs in the Labour Party who are speaking out against this, and we're going to have a little look at that as well. So this was from Rachel Maskell MP, Labour MP.
My constituent was just 46 when she received the terminal diagnosis. She didn't have long. The cancer was advancing and the prognosis would qualify her for an assisted death. Had it been law, she would have consented. Now 54 and in remission, she pleads this bill doesn't pass.
So as you can see there, just an example of where someone was told that they were going to die, and then that didn't happen. They went into remission. They turned it around. If there was an assisted dying bill, they could have sadly lost their life too soon. That is quite scary. And then also, this Labour MP, which I'll show you the video of in a moment, Mary Kelly Foy, she's talking about her own daughter who is disabled, who has been told many, many times that she's only got a few months to live. She's non-verbal. She can't speak for herself. She is worried about what this bill would mean for her daughter. And I saw this morning a disabled lady on GB News talking about how if this bill comes into place, she will actually be terrified to go into the hospital. She'll be terrified that if she has to go into the hospital for everything, you know, the NHS, they have to spend much more money on her as a disabled person than they would any normal adult human being. She is worried that they would find any excuse to get rid of her, and that really, really terrifies her. So let's take a look at what Mary Kelly Foy had to say.
Thank you. On that point, my daughter Maria lived her life with severe disabilities and health conditions, and since her birth, we were told many times that she might have only 6 months to live. She lived for 27 years. Crucially, Maria was non-verbal, and I am filled with dread and fear for those other people like Maria who are non-verbal and don't have that capacity, and what might happen to others like Maria if they aren't loved and cared for and have somebody speaking out for them.
See, that is what we have to worry about. It's cases like those where the NHS, when they've got very, very few resources, they want each person to cost them as little as possible. They will be quick when they think someone's only got a certain number of months to live, they will be quick to recommend to them that they go down this route of assisted dying. They'll be trying to convince the family of that. I think that this is quite worrying. Would be a different case if the NHS had plenty of money and wasn't in this difficult situation. There, it wouldn't be open to as much abuse. I'd lastly just want to look at another Labour MP, Polly Billington. Here she is. She wrote for The Spectator today about why she is voting against the assisted dying bill. She said, how will the law apply to those who do not have full capacity, such as those with learning disabilities or the mentally ill? How will the law protect those who consider themselves a burden, even if the law provides protection for people from external pressures? And what happens if the care options a person wants are not available, and so though they chose assisted death instead? Now, these questions, as I pointed out at the start of the video, this is only the second reading of the bill. There may be MPs who voted in favour of the bill who do have these concerns, but they want to see what amendments are made and how it comes back at the third reading before they make their final decision. They want to see the full process before they make a decision. So this is not confirmed that this bill is going to go ahead and come into law. Polly also said this is a serious issue at this time. The NHS is in a parlous state. Palliative and hospice care is in no better a position. Hospice UK says the sector's finances are the worst they have been for 20 years, with many providers forced to cut services, cut patient beds and make staff redundant. This is the thing I really am most concerned about, and I really think it's important that this is taken seriously. And I was quite concerned when I saw this video of Danny Kruger, the Conservative MP, standing up, of seemingly in Parliament they were refusing to talk about this seriously and talk about what this bill really means. Take a listen to
that. Assisted suicide is legal, including in Oregon.
Councillor Nettles, point of order.
He's using the incorrect language. It's not suicide. That's offensive. Please correct your language, Mr.
What?
That's not a point of order.
I'm grateful for I'm afraid to say, and I'm sorry if offence is given, the fact is that the value of actually having a bill in black and white is that we do need to see what the law really is. And what this bill would do, it would amend the Suicide Act of 1961. It will allow people to assist with a suicide for the first time. So I'm afraid that is, I mean, I respect the Honourable Lady's concerns there, but I'm afraid we do have to use the proper language here.
Quite right from Danny Kruger MP to stand behind what he said there. I think it should be perfectly acceptable to refer to this as assisted suicide, because that is really the crux of this question. Is this essentially helping people to commit suicide? Is that what this bill is doing? We've seen about the possibility of, that discussion in that post from Ava about what they're doing in the Netherlands, of people being able to use this practice when they are in, psychological distress, i.e. they've got mental health problems. There are people with mental health problems that want to commit suicide. Is the NHS going to be helping them to do this? Is it going to become the National Suicide Service? I think these are important questions to ask, and I think for MPs to be worrying about using hurty words, using scary words like suicide in the chamber, I think they need to grow up and they need to start taking this seriously. And that's not the first time that this has happened, because when we had Richard Tice ask a question in Parliament about the tax on farmers, he pointed out the fact that he is hearing that there are farmers that are considering committing suicide so that they can pass their farm down to their children without having to pay Rachel Reeves's inheritance tax. They want to topple themselves before the tax comes into force, because else they won't be able to hand their farm down. That, if you ask me, was a very important question to ask, and it's important that we rectify that policy before we potentially start seeing farmers taking their lives because of this policy, which would be a horrendous thing to see. But when Richard Tice asked that question in Parliament, everyone started shouting like, oh, you can't talk about a subject like that in Parliament. How dare you take back your question? I thought it was horrendous. So I'll leave it there, ladies and gentlemen. Please let me know in the comments what you think. I know there's a lot of mixed opinion on this, as clearly there is in the House of Commons amongst MPs across different parties. We've got all sorts of different opinions. Tell me what you think. Am I worrying too much about this bill? Is it the right thing to stop people suffering? or are the concerns I have raised absolutely valid? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm Chloe Dobbs. Thank you for watching.
My friends, if you're still watching, thank you very much, and I've got a request for you. Thanks to viewers like you, Recent UK, we're on a roll. We're standing up to the woke brigade and championing British pride, especially for the next generation. We're one of the only voices out there that are actually targeting young Brits, seeking to wake them up from this lefty fog and reminding them of what it means to be British. And here's the deal. I want us to go further than that. I want to see Reasoned take on the mainstream left-wing media, a dominant culture here in Britain. We're aiming to expand with more presenters, with hard-hitting documentaries, with live events, with crash courses, the lot. But for that, we need you. We're picking one day to fundraise for this next level project, and that's where you at home come in. We're asking if you'd sign up to share our fundraiser link with your friends and networks on the big day itself. It's a small ask with the potential for a massive impact. Plus, the top fundraisers, you'll bag yourself exclusive goodies and a chance to meet some very special guests, VIPs. More importantly, you'll be standing with us, rallying young Brits to the values that make this country great, as much as the left try and destroy it. So if you're in, click the Google form in the description below, drop in your details, and I'll be in touch. Cheers very much. Let's make it happen together.